Today was the day everything changed. Sitting here on the porch of my house in Queen Anne, one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in Seattle, I watched the light rain falling on the Victorian roofs while two officers escort Sarah Mitchell out of her home. Her screams echo through the immaculate garden she had tended for 25 years. As a tech entrepreneur at 35, I was supposed to be focused on launching my new app, not evicting a 52-year-old lady. 6 months ago, when I moved here, Sarah greeted me with a forced smile and a set of condominium rules. Little did she know that those papers would become her own trap. What started as simple neighborly hostility turned into a battle that divided our community between Old Seattle and New Seattle. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this. It all began when I installed my home automation system. The outdoor lights on my house reacted to movement, ambient music played on a set schedule, and small delivery drones would occasionally land in my garden. Sarah started showing up at my door almost every week, always with a new complaint. "Your lights are keeping me awake," she'd say. Or, "Those flying machines scare my birds." I tried being friendly, explaining the technology, even offered to install special curtains in her house. But every attempt at making peace seemed to make things worse. My work meetings at home became another sticking point. My team came by 3 times a week for brainstorming sessions. Sarah began photographing every parked car, every person coming in and out. She emailed the condo management claiming I was turning a residential area into a commercial one. Other older residents started to side with her. I got dirty looks during my morning runs. Comments like, "These young people don't respect the neighborhood's peace," became common in the communal areas. One lady even suggested I should look for a neighborhood more suited to my age. What they didn't know was that while they were documenting every move I made, I was quietly buying more properties in the complex. Not out of revenge, but because I saw a business opportunity. Seattle was changing, and this neighborhood needed to keep up with that evolution. I just didn't expect this transformation to start with such a personal showdown. The turning point came on a rainy Thursday. I found an official notice from the condo board in my mailbox. Sarah had managed to convince the management to start eviction proceedings against me, claiming misuse of the property for commercial purposes. The document detailed every meeting, every delivery, every visitor in the past 3 months. That night, I called my lawyer for a video conference. As he went through the notice, a discreet smile crossed his face. "Mike, I think it's time to reveal your cards," he said. Then he opened a digital folder containing every purchase contract I'd made over the past few months. 30% of the houses in the complex were in my name, including some occupied by Sarah's close allies. The next morning, during the breakfast Sarah held every Friday with her friends in the garden, I walked up to her table. The group of ladies fell silent as soon as I approached. Calmly, I handed her an envelope similar to the one she had received. "Sarah, as the owner of the property you're occupying, I'm sorry to inform you that I won't be renewing your lease." The silence that followed was deafening. Her teacup trembled in her hand, spilling a few drops onto the white tablecloth. One of her friends let out a muffled, "Oh my God." For the first time since I met her, Sarah was speechless. The news spread through the complex like wildfire. Suddenly, the power that Sarah held over the community started to crumble. Residents who once avoided me were now greeting me with nervous smiles. The balance of power had completely shifted. Within a week, I received an email from management canceling the case against me. Attached was a formal apology and an invitation to join the condo board. The traditionally senior community was facing a transformation that neither Sarah nor her allies could stop. The monthly residents' meeting turned into a battleground. In the condo auditorium, Sarah sat in the front row, surrounded by her most loyal supporters. When I took the stage to present my vision for modernizing the neighborhood, the hostile buzz was palpable. My plans include charging stations for electric cars, a co-working space for residents, and updated leisure areas, I explained, showing my projections on the big screen, all while preserving the historic architecture that makes our complex unique. Sarah abruptly stood up, her voice trembling with indignation. "This is ridiculous. You want to turn our quiet community into a tech park? Some of us have lived here for decades. We have rights." "Ms. Mitchell," I replied, keeping my cool. "As the owner of your residence and 30% of the homes in this complex, I have a responsibility to ensure our properties keep up with the changes in the city." Chaos broke out. Older residents started shouting about tradition and respect. The younger folks, who had previously kept quiet, voiced support for the changes. In the middle of the commotion, Sarah walked up to the stage, stopping just inches away from me. "You may have money, Mr. Thompson, but you don't have history." You have no roots here. You don't know what this place means to us." At that moment, Ashley Williams, the new 40-year-old manager, tried to intervene. "Please, let's keep things civil. We can discuss these changes constructively." But Sarah wasn't done. She pulled out some old photos of the complex from her pocket. "See these window boxes? I planted every flower. That bench? My late husband helped install it. You want to erase all of that to put in your machines?" A heavy silence fell over the auditorium. I realized it wasn't just about modernization or technology. It was about memories, about belonging. But it was also about inevitability. Seattle was changing, and this little corner couldn't remain frozen in time. "Sarah," I said softly, "nobody wants to erase your history. We want to build on it. Your flowers will still be here, but alongside them will be smart irrigation systems. The bench your husband put in will be preserved, but the surrounding plaza will have Wi-Fi so people can work outdoors." She stared at me for a long moment, tears in her eyes, before grabbing her purse and leaving the auditorium. Her friends followed, casting disapproving glances in my direction. The meeting ended on a heavy note, with residents splitting into groups, heatedly debating the future of the complex. While I was packing up my materials, Ashley came over. "You could have been more diplomatic," she whispered. "These people built their lives here." "I know," I replied, "but sometimes change hurts, even when it's needed." Sarah wasn't about to accept defeat easily. The week after the meeting, she launched an organized resistance campaign. Flyers started appearing on residents' doors, warning about the dangers of technological gentrification and the end of traditional community. On one particularly tense morning, I found officers John Parker and David Wilson standing at my door. "Mr. Thompson," Parker began, visibly uncomfortable, "we've received several complaints about noise disturbances and improper use of a residential property." While I explained for the millionth time that my activities were within the rules, I saw Sarah watching from her window with a satisfied smile. She had mobilized a significant group of residents over 60, who now regularly gathered at her house to plan actions against the changes. A petition began circulating, demanding the preservation of the historic character of the complex. But the document went further. It demanded age restrictions for new residents, including age limits and a ban on technology-related activities. It was pure, simple discrimination, only disguised as cultural preservation. "You don't understand," I heard Sarah say during one of her meetings in the community garden. "This place was a refuge. Now we've got drones flying overhead and young people with laptops everywhere." The resistance group kept growing. They began showing up in force in the common areas, strategically occupying the spaces I had planned to renovate. When the installation teams arrived to set up the new security system, they found a group of elderly residents picnicking exactly where the equipment was supposed to go. One afternoon, while I was working at home, I heard a commotion in the garden. Sarah had organized a tradition celebration. Dozens of older residents had brought old furniture and decorations, turning the common area into an impromptu outdoor museum. "This is what we want to preserve," she declared to passersby. Ashley tried to mediate the situation. "We can find a middle ground," she suggested during an informal meeting. "Preserve some traditional spaces while modernizing others." But Sarah and her group refused to compromise. To them, every concession was a defeat. Every new tech installation was an invasion. They began meticulously documenting every change I made, every meeting I held, every person who came in or out of my house. Officer Wilson returned several times, always with new complaints to investigate. "Look, Mr. Thompson," he said on his last visit, "technically you're not breaking any laws, but you're creating a lot of friction in the community." I watched through my window as Sarah led yet another one of her strategic meetings. She had turned her resistance into a personal crusade, mobilizing not just the residents, but trying to get local authorities and historical preservation advocates involved. The irony was that the more she resisted, the more it highlighted the need for change. Her discriminatory behavior and her exclusionary tactics only strengthened my determination to transform the complex into a truly diverse and inclusive space. The legal process began on a gray morning. My lawyer presented a stack of documents that showed a history of age discrimination in the complex. Emails, meeting minutes, and Sarah's controversial petition became solid evidence. During the first hearing, Sarah appeared accompanied by a group of longtime residents. Her lawyer passionately argued about historical preservation and the rights of long-term tenants. But when I presented the property records and the modernization plans approved by the city, the judge began to frown. "Ms. Mitchell," the judge said, "your preservation concerns are understandable, but I don't see a legal basis to stop the changes proposed by the owner." especially since they comply with all city regulations. Sarah stood up, her hands trembling as she clutched a photo album. Your Honor, this is more than just a property issue. It's about an entire community being stripped of its character. Look at these photos from the past 25 years. Every event, every celebration. The judge gently interrupted her. Ms. Mitchell, feelings are not a basis for legal rulings. The documents show a disturbing pattern of age discrimination in your actions. In the days that followed, Sarah ramped up her campaign. She got a local newspaper to run a piece on technological gentrification in traditional neighborhoods. She organized silent protests in front of the complex with placards saying, "Preserve our history," and "Technology is not tradition." But the case was moving along inevitably. Every legal challenge was refuted with solid documentation. The history of discrimination that Sarah had inadvertently created was turning against her. Her emails criticizing young invaders and her attempts to impose age restrictions proved especially damaging to her case. During one of the last hearings, Ashley testified about the multiple mediation attempts that were rejected. Mr. Thompson has always been open to dialogue, she declared. He even proposed to keep historical elements and create spaces dedicated to the community's memory. The most tense moment came when Sarah tried to present a new petition against the forced modernization of the neighborhood. The judge examined the document and noticed that several signatures were from people who no longer lived in the complex. Ms. Mitchell, he said, this court cannot stop the natural progress of a community, as long as it's done within the law. What I see here is a legitimate owner proposing necessary improvements, while you continue a consistent pattern of discriminatory behavior. The final decision was clear. The eviction process could proceed. Sarah would have 30 days to leave the property. As she silently sobbed in her chair, I felt a heaviness in my chest. There were no real winners in this battle, only the inevitable march of time and change. Walking out of the courthouse, I heard Sarah say to her friends, "They can kick me out of my home, but they can't erase our memories." In that moment, I realized I needed to find a way to honor the past while building the future. The eviction day coincided with the annual complex party, a 30-year tradition that Sarah had always organized. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on anyone. Officers Robert Brown and James Anderson arrived at 9 a.m., discreetly parking their vehicles at the side entrance. They found Sarah sitting on her porch, surrounded by her carefully packed belongings. Her closest friends formed a human barrier, some holding old photos of the complex, others simply crying in silence. "Ms. Mitchell," Officer Brown began, "we need to enforce the court order. Please don't make this any harder than it has to be." Sarah slowly stood up, smoothing her dress as she always did before important meetings. "Do you know that my husband planted that magnolia tree?" she said, pointing to the majestic tree in the center of the garden. "It was our first year here. He said it would grow along with our history in this place." The officers exchanged uncomfortable looks. Anderson checked his watch, aware of the deadline they had to meet. That's when Sarah made her final act of defiance. "Now!" she shouted. Suddenly, dozens of elderly residents emerged from their homes, converging into Sarah's garden. They formed a circle around the house, holding hands, and singing an old tune they used to sing at community gatherings. From my window, I watched the scene unfold. Ashley approached the officers, trying to negotiate a few more minutes, but time had run out. "Ms. Mitchell," Anderson called firmly, "don't make us use force. No one wants that." The circle of residents slowly began to break apart, each one realizing the futility of the situation. Sarah stood still for a moment, looking at her home one last time. Then something unexpected happened. She walked to the magnolia tree and broke off a small branch. "This is all I'm taking with me," she declared, her voice strained. "I'm going to plant it wherever I go, because some traditions deserve to go on." The officers started removing the boxes while Sarah watched every move. When they got to the heavier furniture, some of the younger residents, including some who supported the changes, offered to help. "Don't touch anything!" Sarah shouted, but her voice no longer held the same authority. As her possessions were loaded into the moving truck, minor accidents began to occur. An old vase broke, photos fell out of their frames, scratches appeared on the furniture. Each incident made Sarah shudder as if it were a physical blow. Finally, when the last item was removed, Sarah did something no one expected. She walked up to me, who had been watching everything from a distance. "You won," she said. "But remember, this house has memories in its walls. They'll whisper my story long after your smart lights stop working." With that, she got into the car waiting for her. The magnolia branch clutched in her arms, leaving behind 25 years of life and a community divided between the weight of tradition and the inevitability of progress. The weeks following Sarah's departure brought rapid changes to the complex. The impact of her leaving was felt around every corner. The garden she had religiously cared for began to show signs of neglect, and the silence on Sunday mornings, when she usually organized community breakfasts, was deafening. Some of the older residents started putting their houses on the market, fearing they might be next. Others, especially those who had lived there for decades, began avoiding the common areas altogether. The sense of community that Sarah, despite her resistance to change, had helped maintain was starting to disintegrate. One day, I passed by her old house and noticed damage I hadn't seen before. Deep scratches on the porch railing, paint stains on the walls, traces of her hurried removal of belongings. Every mark seemed to tell a story of resistance and loss. Renovation teams started arriving. While supervising the work, I found a photo album in the attic that Sarah had left behind. In the time-yellowed images, I saw Christmas parties, summer picnics, weddings celebrated in the garden. In every photo, Sarah was smiling, surrounded by a community that trusted her. A group of younger residents began moving into the complex. Tech professionals like me brought a different kind of energy. The parking spots now housed electric cars, and the sound of online meetings replaced porch conversations. But something was lost in that transition. The wisdom of the older folks, the stories shared during community gatherings, the traditions that kept everyone connected, all of that began to vanish along with the old residents. One afternoon, sitting on the bench that Sarah's husband had installed, I realized that perhaps we'd been too hasty in our rush for modernization. Technology could improve our lives, but it shouldn't erase our history. The real challenge would be finding a balance between preserving the past and embracing the future. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this. Ashley came over to my house on a rainy afternoon, carrying a proposal from the condo board. "We want you to lead the renovation committee," she said, handing me a folder. "Your modern vision impressed many of our members." I flipped through the documents while she explained the plans. The board wanted a complete transformation, replacing all the traditional elements with modern versions, removing the old communal areas, and installing fully automated systems. "That doesn't feel right," I replied, thinking of the photo album in the attic. "We'd just be repeating Sarah's mistake, only in reverse. She wanted to freeze time, and now we want to completely erase it." The following week, I called a meeting with the remaining residents, both old and new. I proposed the creation of a multi-generational council where every age group would have equal representation. Decisions about changes to the complex would need to be approved by consensus, not majority vote. "We can have our smart systems," I explained, "but let's keep the spaces that tell our story. Sarah's garden can have automated irrigation, but we'll keep the flowers she planted. The meeting room will have state-of-the-art technology, but we'll display old photos of the complex on the walls." I looked around at the faces. The younger ones seemed disappointed with the slowdown of the modernization plans. The older folks were surprised by the consideration for their traditions. "What makes a community special isn't its infrastructure," I continued, "but the stories we share. We can create a place that honors our past while embracing the future." For the first time since Sarah left, I saw genuine smiles among the older residents. One of them even suggested using technology to create a digital archive of the complex's memories. That night, sitting on my porch, I realized that true leadership isn't about imposing change, but about building bridges between different generations and worldviews. The power I'd gained would be best used to unite rather than to transform. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this.